The fluorescent lights above my hospital bed flickered like they were uncertain whether to keep shining on me. I understood that hesitation. I felt it in my own chest, where my heart stuttered through each beat like a drunk finding their way home. The doctor said I needed emergency surgery. My mitral valve was failing. Without intervention, I had maybe 72 hours before my heart simply stopped. 43 years of life, and it had come down to this sterile room with its antiseptic smell and thin cotton gown that left my back exposed to the cold hospital air. My name is Elena Vasquez Morrison, and 3 days ago I believed in my marriage, in my husband, in the life we had built over 18 years. 3 days ago, I was preparing for our anniversary trip to Napa, where Marcus had proposed under a canopy of grapevines, where he had promised me forever with tears in his eyes. 3 days ago, I was someone else entirely, someone who trusted, someone who believed love could survive anything. Thank you for being here. This story isn't easy to tell, but knowing you're listening makes it easier. Stay with me until the end, and if you want, let me know where you're from in the comments. I'm curious how far these words will travel. The cardiac unit at St. Helena Medical Center was quiet that Tuesday afternoon. My room was a private suite on the 4th floor, the kind Marcus had insisted upon when I was admitted. I thought it was sweet then, how he demanded the best for me, how he spoke sharply to the nurses about ensuring my comfort. I didn't know his concern wasn't for my recovery. It was for his convenience, privacy for what he was planning, a stage for betrayal. The room had 2 beds separated by a heavy blue curtain. Hospital policy for overflow situations, they explained. The other bed had been empty when I arrived, but during my first night, I heard movement behind that curtain. Quiet sounds of someone settling in. A man's voice speaking softly to nurses. I didn't think much of it then. I was too focused on my own mortality, on the surgery scheduled for Thursday morning, on the terrifying reality that my heart was failing at 43. My daughter Camilla had flown in from Stanford the moment she heard about my hospitalization. She sat beside my bed that first day, holding my hand like she used to when she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. Her dark eyes were so much like my mother's that it made my chest ache with something beyond the physical damage. She was 20 years old, brilliant and fierce and compassionate, the best thing Marcus and I had created together. Looking at her face, I found a reason to fight. I found a reason to survive whatever was coming. Marcus had been in and out those first 2 days. Business meetings, he said, critical negotiations that couldn't be postponed, even for his wife's medical emergency. I understood. I had always understood. I had spent 18 years understanding, accommodating, making excuses for his absences. Marcus ran Morrison Development, the commercial real estate company I had helped him build from nothing when we were young and hungry and full of dreams about our future together. When we married, he was a junior broker with ambition and charm and a smile that made me feel like the most beautiful woman in any room. I was a financial analyst with a trust fund from my grandfather and a talent for seeing potential in broken things. Together, we built Morrison Development into a company worth $47 million. The house in the hills with its infinity pool and rose garden that I tended myself. The vacation properties in Aspen and the Hamptons. The life that looked perfect from outside. I should have seen the cracks earlier. The late nights that stretched into early mornings with no explanation. The business trips that multiplied every month, each one taking him farther away for longer. The phone always face down on tables. The way he stepped outside for certain calls. The way his eyes would flicker to the screen with an urgency that suggested something far more pressing than real estate deals. But I was busy too, running finances, raising Camila, managing the household, volunteering for the hospital foundation. I told myself all marriages went through phases. I told myself 18 years meant something. I told myself so many beautiful lies. On Tuesday afternoon, Camilla had gone to the cafeteria for coffee. The machines on the 4th floor were broken, she said. I was alone with my heart monitor and the rustle behind the curtain from my mysterious neighbor. The sedatives made everything soft at the edges, like looking at the world through gauze. I drifted in and out of sleep, aware of sounds but not quite processing them, floating in that space between consciousness and dreams. I heard the door open. Heavy footsteps on the linoleum floor. Marcus's cologne reached me before his voice. That expensive sandalwood I'd bought him for Christmas. The one he had kissed me so tenderly for giving him. I tried to open my eyes, to smile at him, to show him I was grateful he had come. But the sedatives made my eyelids heavy. I could only manage a flutter. Then I heard another set of footsteps. Lighter. The click of heels on linoleum. A woman's walk. Is she asleep? A woman's voice. Young. Unfamiliar. With a nasal quality that grated against my ears even through the fog of medication. The nurses said she's sedated for the pre-op work. Marcus's voice was different. Casual in a way I had never heard when he spoke about me. Dismissive. She won't remember any of this. They've got her pumped full of drugs. I wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to sit up and demand who this woman was. But my body wouldn't cooperate. The sedatives had turned my limbs to lead, my thoughts to molasses. I could only lie there, trapped inside myself, listening to the nightmare unfold. So, this is the famous Elena. The woman moved closer. I felt her examining me like an exhibit in a museum, like something dead and pinned behind glass. She's older than I expected. Kind of plain, honestly. She's 43. Marcus's voice held contempt. She was pretty once, when we met, before she let herself go, before she got so boring and predictable. The words hit me like physical blows. Let myself go? I exercised 4 times a week with a personal trainer. I maintained the same weight from my 30s. I spent hours on my appearance because Marcus had always said he valued a put-together wife. But hearing his disgust, I understood nothing I did would ever be enough. The goalposts had been moved while I wasn't looking. He had already decided I was worthless. Well, she won't be a problem much longer. Her heels clicked around the bed, circling like a vulture. The surgery is Thursday? Thursday morning at 6. The doctors say it's risky. Cardiac valve replacement at her age, with her history. His voice was clinical, discussing my death like a business problem. Significant chance she won't make it off the table. 30% mortality rate for this procedure. And if she does make it, if she's one of the lucky 70%, then we wait for complications. Recovery is brutal, Brittany. Infections happen all the time in hospitals. Blood clots, stroke, all sorts of things can go wrong. He recited these facts like a shopping list, like he had researched them. Either way, I inherit everything. The company is in both our names, but I'm the surviving spouse. Right of survivorship on all joint assets. The house, the vacation properties, the investment accounts, and there's a $2 million life insurance policy that pays out regardless of how she dies. My heart monitor beeped faster. I felt panic rising in my chest like a trapped bird, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but lie there and absorb the horror. What about the daughter? Camilla gets her trust fund from Elena's grandfather. That was set up years ago. Can't be touched. Resentment in his voice. The bitter edge of a man who had tried and failed to access money that wasn't his. But everything else, the business, the real estate, the accounts, comes to me as surviving spouse. And once we're married, baby, what's mine is yours. Married. The word echoed in my drugged brain like a bell tolling my own funeral. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just cheating. This was a plan. Premeditated financial destruction wrapped in medical tragedy. He wasn't just hoping I would die. He was planning to profit from it. Speaking of the surgery, the woman said, "Why are we paying for this at all? The deposit was $50,000. That's our honeymoon money, Marcus. The trip to Bali you promised. The villa with the private beach. I know, but the doctors. But nothing." Her voice turned hard, petulant, like a child denied a toy. If she's going to die anyway, why waste money trying to save her? Cancel the surgery. Tell them you can't afford it. Get the deposit back and let's book our flights. There was a pause. A terrible pause where my husband of 18 years actually considered whether my life was worth less than a vacation in Bali. Whether the woman who had helped him build his empire was worth less than a beachfront villa. The doctors won't just cancel. They're saying it's an emergency, life-threatening situation. Then tell them you've decided on alternative treatment, homeopathic medicine, faith healing. I don't care. Just get the money back. Her voice rose with frustration. I'm tired of waiting for our life while you play devoted husband. Every day I have to pretend I don't exist while she gets to be Mrs. Morrison. I'm tired of it. I heard movement. The wet sound of a kiss. Right there in my hospital room, 3 feet from my supposedly unconscious body. You're right, Marcus said, his voice soft, intimate, loving in a way he hadn't spoken to me in years. Why waste money on a lost cause? I'll tell them we've decided against the surgery. We're taking her home for alternative treatments. That's my man. Another kiss, wet and lingering. And after she's gone, we can stop sneaking around. I'm tired of being your secret. I want to be your wife. I want to live in that house, drive her car, wear her jewelry, sleep in her bed. I want everything she has. I deserve it. You'll have it all, baby. Every single thing. Just a few more weeks. Maybe less if we're lucky. I was crying. Tears leaked from beneath my closed eyelids and tracked down my temples. 18 years. I had given this man 18 years. Helped him build his company from nothing. Raised his daughter, supported his ambitions, forgiven his absences. I had loved him with everything I had. And this was how he repaid me. Planning my death with his mistress while I lay sedated and helpless. The heart monitor was screaming now, numbers climbing into the red zone. My pulse raced with terror and grief. The door burst open. Nurses rushed in. Mr. Morrison, step back immediately. Her vitals are spiking dangerously. Is she dying? The hope in his voice was obscene, naked. He couldn't even hide it. Her heart rate is severely elevated. We need to adjust her medication right now. Hands on my arm, something cold flowing into my IV. You need to leave the room, sir. Both of you. Of course. We'll come back when she's stable. Marcus's voice retreated, murmuring to Brittany, let's get coffee. Give them time. The last thing I heard before darkness took me was Brittany's laugh, light and careless, echoing in the hallway as they walked away. When I woke, evening had fallen. Purple and orange painted the sky outside my window. My head was clearer, the sedatives wearing off enough to think, to process, to remember with horrible clarity. It hadn't been a nightmare. My husband was planning to cancel my surgery so he could use the deposit for a honeymoon with his mistress. He was hoping I would die so he could inherit everything and start a new life with a woman who wanted to sleep in my bed and wear my jewelry. I turned my head slowly, testing my body. The movement sent dizziness through me, but I pushed past it. I needed to think. I needed to plan. I noticed the curtain on my right billowing slightly. My mysterious neighbor. How much had he heard? The door opened. Camilla entered with coffee and a paper bag from the cafeteria. Her face lit up. Mom, you're awake. She rushed to my bedside, setting down her burdens to take my hand. The nurses said you had an episode. They said your heart rate spiked. Dad was here, but they made him leave. Dad. The word felt like poison in my mouth. I'm okay, sweetheart. Medication issues. Where's your father now? He had to go back to the office. Some emergency with the Henderson deal. She rolled her eyes with casual contempt for his workaholic tendencies. He said he'd try to come back tonight. Don't wait up. Camilla, I need you to do something. Go home tonight. Get real sleep in your own bed. You've been here 2 days straight. Mom, I'm not leaving you alone. Please. I squeezed her hand with maternal authority that brooks no argument. I need you healthy and strong for my surgery. Go home. Sleep. Come back tomorrow with that terrible coffee from Main Street that I love. She wanted to argue. I could see it in her stubborn jaw she inherited from my mother. But eventually she nodded, kissing my forehead with gentle tenderness. 7 a.m. tomorrow, and I'm bringing breakfast too. Promise me you'll try to eat something tonight. I promise, sweetheart. I love you. I love you too, Mom. So much. After she left, I tried to organize my thoughts. The surgery was in 2 days. Marcus was planning to cancel it. I was physically weak, barely able to lift my head, financially entangled in ways that gave him control over our joint accounts, legally bound to a man who wanted me dead. No, wait, not completely bound. We had a prenuptial agreement. My grandfather's lawyers had insisted on it 20 years ago. The trust fund, $300,000 that had become my safety net, was mine alone. The initial investment in Morrison Development, $200,000 from my grandfather's estate that had launched the company, was protected too. But everything we'd built together was subject to divorce division. Divorce. The word floated through my mind like a life raft. If I could survive, I could divorce him, expose him, take my half of everything and walk away. But that required surviving. And Marcus was going to cancel my surgery. That's quite a husband you have there. The voice came from behind the curtain, making me jump. Deep, male, cultured, familiar in some way I couldn't place. You heard? My voice was barely a whisper. I heard everything, Mrs. Morrison. The curtain rustled. A hand appeared, large, weathered with age, but strong, with a gold signet ring bearing an elaborate crest. The hand pulled back the curtain, revealing my mysterious neighbor. He was somewhere in his mid-60s, with silver hair swept back and sharp blue eyes that gleamed with intelligence. His face was distinguished, lined with life, laugh lines around his eyes, furrows of concentration on his brow, bandage around his head, left arm in a sling, but he projected power and authority that filled the room. I knew him from somewhere. The recognition tickled at the edges of my memory. Have we met? I asked, struggling to sit up slightly. He smiled, softening the hard lines around his eyes. We have, Elena, though it's been almost 20 years. You were using your maiden name at Columbia. I was a guest lecturer in your MBA program. Victor Ashford. Victor Ashford. The recognition clicked with almost physical force. He'd been a federal prosecutor then, teaching while considering his next move. We talked about ethics in financial markets. He'd recommended me for an internship at Goldman Sachs. Judge Ashford, I breathed, you're on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals now. I've read about your cases. Until I tumbled down my stairs last week and ended up sharing a hospital room with you. He shifted, wincing slightly. The universe has a strange sense of humor. The universe has nothing to do with it. His voice went sharp, cutting through my fog. Your husband is planning to murder you, Elena. That's what I heard. Not mercy. Not a difficult medical decision. Murder by willful neglect, followed by financial theft on a massive scale. Murder. That's exactly what it was. Not dramatic violence, something quieter, more insidious. A decision to withhold treatment, to sacrifice my life for honeymoon money in Bali. I don't know what to do, I admitted, tears coming again. I'm trapped. The surgery is in 2 days, and if he cancels, he won't cancel it. Something in Victor's voice made me stop crying. Some steel beneath the surface that reminded me why this man had spent 30 years putting criminals behind bars. How can you be sure? Because I'm going to make phone calls tonight. He reached for his bedside phone. This hospital received a grant from the Ashford Foundation 3 years ago. The chief of surgery is a personal friend. We served on a medical ethics board together. And I have resources your husband, for all his millions, can't anticipate. Why would you help me? We met a few times, 20 years ago. I know enough. His eyes met mine. I know you wrote a paper arguing financial professionals have a moral obligation to protect the vulnerable. I know you're lying here while your husband plans your death. And I spent my career putting men like Marcus Morrison in prison. His expression darkened into something cold and predatory. I also know your husband professionally, Elena. 7 years ago, a case crossed my desk. Suspicious real estate transactions in Nevada. Shell companies buying and selling at inflated prices. Fraudulent appraisals. Possible money laundering. The primary suspect was Marcus Morrison. My blood ran cold. What happened? Dismissed on a technicality. Procedural error in evidence gathering, a junior attorney's mistake with a warrant. The whole thing collapsed. Victor's hand tightened on the phone, knuckles going white. Marcus Morrison walked free, and I've wondered ever since what else he was guilty of. He fixed me with those sharp blue eyes. Tonight, lying in this bed, I heard him confess to conspiracy to commit murder. I heard him discuss insurance fraud and financial exploitation. Elena, I'm going to help you survive this surgery, and then I'm going to help you destroy him completely. Before I could respond, the door swung open. Lights flickered on, harsh and fluorescent. Marcus stood with Brittany on his arm. He wore the charcoal suit I'd bought him for his birthday. She wore a red dress and my grandmother's pendant, the diamond teardrop in my family for 4 generations that my mother had given me on my wedding day. Elena, darling, you're awake? Marcus's voice dripped with false concern. The nurses said you had an episode. I was so worried. He approached, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, calculation. The reassessment of a predator who realizes his prey might not be as helpless as he thought. I'm fine. Medication adjustment. Well, we need to discuss your surgery, the cost. The deposit was $50,000 and the procedure will be $200,000 total. Insurance is fighting the claim, pre-existing condition, they say. I knew this was a lie. Our insurance was excellent. I had chosen the plan myself. But I said nothing. Let him spin his web while Victor listened. I've been looking at alternatives. Clinics in Mexico, holistic treatments first, acupuncture, herbal supplements, holistic treatments, I said, for a failing heart valve. There are options, natural remedies. Maybe if you'd taken better care of yourself. Excuse me. Victor pulled his curtain fully open. His eyes fixed on Marcus with terrifying intensity. The gaze of a judge who has heard every excuse and lie imaginable. Did I understand correctly that you're considering canceling your wife's life-saving surgery for holistic alternatives? Marcus's face cycled through surprise, annoyance, then wariness as he registered the commanding presence. I'm sorry, who are you? Victor Ashford. Judge Victor Ashford, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. He let that sink in. And you are Marcus Morrison, real estate developer, Nevada and California. I believe we almost met once, about 7 years ago. I watched my husband go pale. He remembered. Judge Ashford, what a coincidence. Quite, almost as coincidental as overhearing you discuss canceling life-saving surgery for herbal supplements. Tell me, Mr. Morrison, are you familiar with criminal negligence in a spousal context? I don't know what you think you heard. I heard enough. Victor cut him off with judicial authority. If anything happens to Elena, if her surgery is canceled, if she dies from preventable causes, I will ensure every relevant authority is informed. The district attorney, the state medical board, the FBI's financial crimes division. Marcus was sweating. His hands trembled. This is none of your business. A private family matter. Murder is never private, Mr. Morrison. Neither is insurance fraud, which I believe you were contemplating with those life insurance documents. Marcus stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. Brittany, we're leaving. She looked up confused. But baby, we just got here. You said you were going to talk to the doctors? I said we're leaving. He grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the door. But before he escaped, Victor spoke again, his voice carrying weight. Mr. Morrison, one more thing. Marcus froze, his hand on the door handle. The surgery will proceed as scheduled Thursday morning. I've already spoken to the chief of surgery. He's an old friend. Victor's smile was beatific, but his eyes were the eyes of a hanging judge. I'll be watching your family's situation very closely indeed. Marcus stared for a long moment, face twisted with impotent rage, then yanked open the door and disappeared with Brittany tottering after him on her ridiculous heels. In the silence that followed, I realized I was shaking. The adrenaline drained away, leaving me weak and trembling. He can't hurt you here, Victor said gently. And after tonight, he'll be very careful about what he does. How did you rest now, Elena? You have a surgery to survive. and you'll need your strength. He settled back against his pillows. We'll talk more tomorrow. I have phone calls to make tonight. I wanted to ask more questions, but exhaustion was overwhelming. My eyes were closing despite my best efforts. The last thing I saw was Victor's face, illuminated by his phone screen, his expression hard and focused as he began to make his calls. I didn't know what wheels he was setting in motion. Didn't know this chance encounter would become the foundation of my resurrection. All I knew was that for the first time since hearing my husband plan my death, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. And beneath it, rising like fire from ashes, something darker and more powerful. I felt the first stirrings of rage. The next morning arrived with the sterile efficiency of hospital routine. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications, preparing me for the surgery that would either save my life or end it. But my mind wasn't on the medical procedures. It was on the man in the next bed and the promise he had made in the darkness of the night before. Victor was already awake when I opened my eyes, sitting up against his pillows with a newspaper spread across his lap. The morning light streaming through the window caught the silver in his hair and illuminated the sharp angles of his face. He looked like what he was, a man accustomed to power, to making decisions that shaped lives, to seeing justice done when others had given up hope. Good morning, Elena. His voice was warm but businesslike. How are you feeling? Like a woman who found out her husband wants her dead. I managed a weak smile. So, all things considered, I've been better. He folded the newspaper and set it aside, giving me his full attention. I made several calls last night. The chief of surgery has been briefed on the situation, not the details, but enough to ensure your surgery proceeds regardless of what Marcus tries. The hospital administration has been informed that any attempt to interfere with your care will be met with legal consequences. I stared at him, overwhelmed by the scope of what he had done for a woman he barely knew. I don't understand. Why are you doing all this? You could have just reported what you heard to the police and let them handle it. Because the police would take weeks to investigate, and you don't have weeks. Victor's eyes met mine with an intensity that made me feel both seen and protected. Because I've spent 30 years watching men like Marcus Morrison slip through the cracks of the justice system on technicalities and procedural errors. Because I heard him talk about your death like it was a business transaction, and I refuse to stand by while that happens. He paused, his expression softening slightly. And because 20 years ago, a young woman in my class wrote a paper about the moral obligations of those in positions of power. She argued that true success isn't measured in profits or victories, but in the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. That paper stayed with me, Elena. It reminded me why I went into law in the first place. I'd like to think I'm honoring the principles you articulated all those years ago. I felt tears prick my eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude, of disbelief that in my darkest hour, an unexpected ally had appeared like an answer to a prayer I hadn't known I was praying. What happens now? I asked. Now, you focus on surviving your surgery. That's your only job today and tomorrow. Victor reached for a manila folder on his bedside table. While you're in the operating room, I'll be making more calls. I have contacts at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division who owe me favors. I have a friend who's a forensic accountant specializing in real estate fraud. And I have a team of attorneys who would love nothing more than to take down a man like Marcus Morrison. But we don't have any evidence, I protested. Everything I heard was just conversation. He could deny it all. That's where you're wrong. Victor's smile was predatory, the smile of a hunter who has spotted his prey. Your hospital room has security cameras, standard practice in cardiac units to monitor patient safety. Marcus and his mistress had their little conversation in full view of at least 2 cameras. I've already requested that the footage be preserved. My heart skipped a beat. Security cameras. Of course. I had forgotten about them in the terror of hearing Marcus's plans. But Victor hadn't. He had been thinking strategically while I had been drowning in despair. Additionally, Victor continued, I noticed your husband was wearing a smartwatch during his visit. If he sent any messages or made any calls during that time, there will be records. And his mistress, Brittany, I believe her name is, struck me as the type who might have a digital footprint a mile wide. Social media accounts, text messages, emails, people who plan crimes rarely have the discipline to stay completely silent about them. You really have thought of everything. I've had 30 years of practice putting criminals behind bars. Victor's expression hardened. Marcus Morrison escaped justice once because of a technicality. That won't happen again. This time, we're going to build a case so airtight that no procedural error, no expensive lawyer, no amount of money will save him. The door opened, and a nurse entered to check my vitals. I pretended to be calm, pretended to be just another patient preparing for surgery, while inside, my mind was racing with possibilities I hadn't dared to consider before. Survival wasn't just about getting through the operation anymore. It was about emerging on the other side, ready to fight. After the nurse left, Victor spoke again. There's one more thing I need to discuss with you, and it's important. Your prenuptial agreement, do you remember the specific terms? I thought back to that document, signed so long ago, when I was young and optimistic and certain that our love would last forever. The trust fund money is mine alone. The initial investment in Morrison Development is protected, but everything we built together during the marriage is community property. That's standard for a prenup of that era. But here's what I want you to think about while you're recovering from surgery. Victor leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. Your husband has been running Morrison Development for 18 years. In that time, how closely have you been involved in the day-to-day finances? I handled the books in the early years, I said slowly, trying to remember. But as the company grew, Marcus hired accountants, a CFO. He said I should focus on Camilla, on the house, on our social life. He said he wanted to give me the freedom to not worry about business anymore. And you trusted him? I trusted him completely. The bitterness in my own voice surprised me. I trusted him with everything. Victor nodded, as if confirming something he had suspected. Based on what I heard in this room yesterday, the casual way he discussed inheriting everything, the reference to a past investigation involving shell companies and fraudulent appraisals, I would be very surprised if the books of Morrison Development are as clean as they appear on the surface. I felt a chill run through me. You think he's been stealing? I think a man who would let his wife die to inherit her assets is not a man who would hesitate to embezzle from the company they built together. I think a man who was investigated for money laundering 7 years ago didn't suddenly become honest. Victor's eyes were cold. I think when we start digging, we're going to find that Marcus Morrison has been building his own private fortune using company funds that should be half yours, for years. The implications hit me like a wave. If Victor was right, this wasn't just about a cheating husband and a mistress who wanted my jewelry. This was about systematic theft, fraud, embezzlement. This was about years of deception far deeper than I had imagined. How do we prove it? Carefully, methodically, legally. Victor's expression was grim. After your surgery, once you're stable, we'll start pulling threads. Financial records, bank statements, property transfers, corporate filings, every transaction Morrison Development has made in the past decade. It will take time, but the evidence is there. It's always there, if you know where to look. The door opened again. This time, it was Camilla, exactly as she had promised. Arriving at 7 a.m. with coffee and a paper bag that smelled like fresh pastries. Her face lit up when she saw me awake, and she hurried to my bedside with the enthusiasm of a daughter who feared she might lose her mother. Mom, you look so much better than yesterday. She kissed my cheek and set down her offerings. I brought your favorite, those almond croissants from the place on Main Street, and the terrible coffee, just like you asked. I glanced at Victor, who had subtly drawn his curtain partially closed to give us privacy, while still being able to observe. He caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. We had an understanding now, a partnership built on circumstance and shared purpose. Thank you, sweetheart. I took the coffee Camilla offered, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in days. She settled into the chair beside my bed, her dark eyes searching my face. Mom, can I ask you something? Anything. When Dad was here yesterday, you seemed different, distant, like you were looking at him but not really seeing him. Camilla hesitated. Is everything okay between you two? I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to warn her about the monster who wore her father's face, the man who had discussed her mother's death with his mistress like it was a business opportunity. But something held me back. Maybe it was maternal instinct, protecting her from a truth that would shatter her world. Maybe it was strategy, knowing that she might accidentally tip Marcus off if she knew the full story. Or maybe it was simply that some truths are too heavy to share until the moment is right. Your father and I have been going through a difficult time, I said carefully. The stress of my illness, his work pressures. We haven't been connecting the way we used to. I noticed. Camilla's voice was quiet, thoughtful. I've noticed for a while, actually. He's always on his phone. Always working late. Always somewhere else, even when he's in the same room. My heart ached for her. She had seen the cracks in our marriage, even before I had been willing to admit they existed. I'm sorry you had to see that, sweetheart. Don't apologize, Mom. You're not the one who should be sorry. There was an edge to her voice I hadn't heard before, a maturity born of observation and disappointment. I just want you to know that whatever happens, with the surgery, with Dad, with everything, I'm on your side, always. I reached for her hand and squeezed it tight. That means more to me than you know. The morning passed in a blur of medical preparations. More tests, more consultations. The surgical team came to explain the procedure one final time, to answer my questions, to have me sign consent forms that acknowledged all the ways the operation could go wrong. Through it all, I felt strangely calm. Victor's presence in the next bed was a constant reassurance, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. Marcus arrived around noon, alone this time, no Brittany in sight. He brought flowers, an ostentatious bouquet of roses that must have cost a small fortune. He brought chocolates. He brought all the trappings of a devoted husband visiting his sick wife, and I wondered how long he had practiced this performance. Elena, darling. He kissed my forehead, and it took everything I had not to flinch away from his touch. How are you feeling? The nurses said you had a good night. I'm as ready as I'll ever be, I said, keeping my voice neutral. The surgery is tomorrow morning at 6. I know. I've cleared my entire schedule to be here. He settled into the chair Camilla had vacated when she went to get lunch. I want you to know that I support whatever decision you make about your treatment. If you want to go ahead with the surgery, I'm behind you 100%. I stared at him. This man I had loved for 18 years. This man I had built a life with. And I tried to reconcile the husband I thought I knew with the monster I had heard in this room yesterday. The performance was flawless. The concern in his voice, the worry in his eyes, the gentle way he held my hand. It was all so convincing that for a moment, I almost doubted what I had heard, almost believed that it had been a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by sedatives and fear. Then I saw his eyes flicker toward Victor's curtain, and I saw the calculation behind the concern. He was performing for an audience he knew was listening. Thank you, Marcus. I forced a smile. That means a lot. We're going to get through this together. He squeezed my hand. And when you're better, we'll take that trip to Napa. Renew our vows, maybe? Remind ourselves why we fell in love in the first place. The audacity of the lie took my breath away. 24 hours ago, he had been planning to cancel this surgery and let me die. Now he was talking about renewing our vows. The whiplash between who he was in private and who he pretended to be in public was dizzying. That sounds lovely, I said, playing along. Playing the part of the naive wife who didn't know her husband wanted her dead. I'd like that very much. Behind the partially drawn curtain, I knew Victor was listening, documenting, building the case that would eventually bring Marcus Morrison to his knees. Marcus stayed for an hour, maintaining his performance of devotion. He talked about the company, about deals he was closing, about the new development project in Henderson that was going to make them millions. He talked about Camilla's future, about how proud he was of her, about how she had his business instincts. He talked and talked, filling the room with words that meant nothing, and I listened and smiled and pretended to believe every lie. When he finally left, claiming he had a meeting he couldn't postpone, the relief was so profound, I felt tears spring to my eyes. "You did well?" Victor's voice came from behind the curtain, quiet enough that only I could hear. That kind of sustained deception is difficult to maintain. You showed remarkable composure. It's easier when you know you're playing a role. I wiped my eyes. When you know the truth behind the mask. Victor pulled his curtain open fully. His expression was thoughtful, assessing. "Tomorrow is your surgery. I want you to focus entirely on that. Don't think about Marcus. Don't think about the case. Don't think about anything except healing. And what will you be doing while I'm in the operating room?" "Working." Victor's smile was grim. "I've already reached out to my contacts at the FBI. They're very interested in revisiting the Morrison development case from 7 years ago. New evidence has a way of opening old wounds in the justice system. You think they'll find something?" "I know they will. Men like Marcus Morrison don't become corrupt overnight. They start small, a fraudulent appraisal here, a shell company there, and they grow bolder over time. The crimes he committed 7 years ago didn't stop just because he wasn't caught. They evolved, they multiplied. And somewhere in that trail of deceit, there are records. There are always records." I thought about all the years I had looked the other way, all the times Marcus had dismissed my questions about the company's finances, all the late nights and secret phone calls and business trips to places I had never verified. I had been willfully blind, I realized. I had chosen not to see because seeing would have meant confronting a truth I wasn't ready to face. "I was so stupid," I said softly. "For so long." "You were trusting." Victor's voice was gentle. "There's a difference. Trust isn't a weakness, Elena. It's a strength that others choose to exploit. The fault lies with those who betray trust, not with those who offer it." The evening passed quietly. Camilla returned from lunch and stayed until visiting hours ended, filling the room with stories about her classes at Stanford, her friends, her plans for the future. I drank in every word, memorizing the sound of her voice, the light in her eyes, the way she laughed at her own jokes. If something went wrong tomorrow, if I didn't survive the surgery, I wanted these memories to be my last. Before she left, Camilla hugged me tighter than she had since she was a little girl. "I love you, Mom. I'll be here when you wake up, I promise." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." After she was gone, the room fell into the deep silence of night. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The fluorescent lights dimmed to a soft glow. I lay in my hospital bed and tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't quiet. Tomorrow, surgeons would open my chest and repair my broken heart. The irony wasn't lost on me. My physical heart could be fixed with modern medicine. My emotional heart, shattered by 18 years of deception, would take much longer to heal. "Elena." Victor's voice cut through the darkness. "Are you awake?" "I can't sleep." "Neither can I." I heard him shift in his bed. "I've been thinking about what happens after tomorrow, about the path forward." "Tell me." I needed something to focus on, something other than the fear that kept trying to creep into my thoughts. "After you recover, and you will recover, we're going to build a case against Marcus that will be unassailable. Financial crimes, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. By the time we're done, he won't just lose you. He'll lose everything. And Brittany? Conspiracy charges carry substantial penalties. If she was involved in planning your death, she'll face the same consequences as Marcus. Perhaps worse, if we can prove she was the instigator." I thought about the woman who had circled my hospital bed like a vulture, wearing my grandmother's pendant, talking about sleeping in my bed and driving my car. She wanted everything I had. She was going to get nothing. What about the company? I asked. Morrison Development. My grandfather's investment. The years of work I put into building it. That's where things get interesting. Victor's voice held a note of satisfaction. If we can prove that Marcus embezzled from the company, and I'm increasingly certain we can, then you won't just be entitled to half in a divorce settlement. You'll be entitled to restitution. Recovery of stolen assets. Depending on the scope of the fraud, you could end up with considerably more than half. The thought of walking away from my marriage with not just my dignity, but my financial future intact was almost too much to hope for. I had spent the last 24 hours assuming I would be lucky to survive with my life. The idea that I might actually win was revolutionary. I want you to understand something, Elena. Victor's voice was serious now, weighted with experience. The road ahead won't be easy. Legal battles are long and exhausting. Marcus will fight back with everything he has. He'll try to discredit you, to paint himself as the victim, to drag your name through the mud. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared for anything that ends with him in prison, and me free of him. Good. Hold on to that resolve. You're going to need it. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Tomorrow, my life would change forever, one way or another. I would either wake up from surgery with a repaired heart and a second chance at life, or I wouldn't wake up at all. Victor? I said into the darkness. Yes? Thank you for everything, for listening, for helping, for giving me hope when I had none. There was a long pause before he answered. Thank me when it's over. Thank me when Marcus Morrison is behind bars and you're free to live the life you deserve. Until then, I'm just doing what should have been done 7 years ago. I closed my eyes and tried to find peace. Tomorrow would come whether I was ready or not. And when I woke up from surgery, not if, I would begin the work of dismantling the man who had tried to destroy me. The monitors beeped softly in the darkness, a mechanical lullaby that reminded me I was still alive, still fighting, still here despite everything Marcus had planned. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like distant stars, indifferent to the drama unfolding in this small hospital room. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably sleeping peacefully in our bed, dreaming of the life he would live once I was gone. He didn't know that the universe had other plans. He didn't know that the man in the next bed was already dismantling his carefully constructed empire. The last thought I had before sleep finally claimed me was of my grandmother's pendant, the diamond teardrop that Brittany had worn around her neck like a trophy she had already won. One day soon, I would take it back. I would take back everything they had tried to steal from me, my dignity, my security, my future, my life. And then I would watch them lose absolutely everything they had ever valued in return. Every single last thing they had ever treasured. The surgery took 7 hours. I don't remember any of it, of course. The anesthesia did its job, pulling me into a darkness so complete that time itself seemed to stop existing. But I'm told that the surgical team worked with precision and care, that Dr. Harrison himself performed the procedure after Victor's phone calls had ensured I received the chief of surgery's personal attention. They opened my chest, stopped my heart, repaired the damaged valve with a mechanical replacement, and then brought me back to life. Simple when you describe it that way. Miraculous when you're the one lying on the table. I woke in the ICU to the sound of machines and the blur of fluorescent lights. Everything hurt. My chest felt like someone had parked a car on it, then backed up and done it again for good measure. Every breath sent waves of pain through my torso. But beneath the pain, beneath the fog of post-surgical medication, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Something that made all the suffering worthwhile. I felt alive. Camilla was there when I opened my eyes, her face hovering over mine like an angel sent to guide me back from whatever darkness had claimed me during those 7 hours. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling, laughing through her tears in that way people do when relief overwhelms everything else, when the fear they've been holding finally finds release. Mom, you're okay. You made it. She gripped my hand like she was afraid I might float away, like her grip was the only thing keeping me tethered to this world. The doctor said everything went perfectly. The valve is replaced. Your heart is working better than it has in years. You're going to be fine. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the intubation, burned and scratched by hours of breathing tubes. All I could manage was a weak squeeze of her fingers, a tiny pressure that I hoped conveyed everything I couldn't say. I'm here. I love you. I'm not leaving you. Not now. Not ever. Marcus wasn't there. I noticed his absence immediately, even through the haze of drugs and pain. My daughter sat alone at my bedside. No devoted husband holding vigil, no concerned partner waiting anxiously for news of whether his wife would survive. Just Camilla, beautiful and fierce and loyal, the only family I had left who truly loved me without conditions or ulterior motives. "Where's your father?" I managed to croak out, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. Camilla's expression flickered. Something passed across her face. Anger, disappointment, resignation. Before she composed herself into a neutral mask I recognized all too well. It was the same mask I had worn for years when making excuses for Marcus. The same forced acceptance of unacceptable behavior. He had an emergency at work, some crisis with the Henderson project that couldn't wait. Her voice was flat, devoid of conviction. She didn't believe the excuse any more than I did. He said he'd come as soon as he could. He sent flowers. I followed her gaze to a massive arrangement of orchids on the windowsill, expensive and impersonal, the kind of flowers you send when you want to appear caring without actually being present. The kind of flowers a man sends to the wife he secretly hopes won't wake up, covering his bases in case she does. They were beautiful, I supposed, in the cold, sterile way expensive things often are, but they were also meaningless. A gesture without substance. A performance for an audience of one. How long was I in surgery? 7 hours. It felt like 7 years. Camilla's voice cracked, revealing the depth of fear she had been holding at bay. I sat in that waiting room, and every time someone in scrubs walked by, my heart stopped. I kept thinking about all the things I never told you. All the times I should have called, but didn't because I was too busy with school, or too tired, or too caught up in my own life. All the stupid arguments we had about nothing, about curfews and grades and whether I was spending too much time with boys. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of mascara across her cheek that made her look suddenly younger, like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I promised myself that if you woke up, I would never waste another moment. I would tell you every day how much I love you. I would call twice a week, not once a month. I would come home for holidays instead of going on trips with friends. She squeezed my hand tighter. I promised myself I would be the daughter you deserve. You already are, I whispered, my voice barely audible. You're the best thing I ever did. The only thing in my life I'm completely proud of. I love you too, Mom. Her tears fell onto our joined hands, more than anything in this world. We stayed like that for a while, mother and daughter, connected by our hands and our hearts, and the shared relief of having dodged death. Nurses came and went, checking my vitals, adjusting my medications, documenting my recovery in careful clinical notes. Doctors stopped by to explain what they had done and what I could expect in the coming weeks. Rehabilitation, physical therapy, a careful, gradual return to normal life. They spoke of cardiac rehabilitation programs and lifestyle modifications, of the importance of rest and the dangers of overexertion. I listened and nodded and asked appropriate questions, playing the part of the grateful patient. Normal life. I almost laughed at the concept. There would be nothing normal about my life once I left this hospital. The old Elena, the trusting wife and dutiful partner, had died on that operating table. The woman who emerged was someone new, someone harder, someone with a mission that went far beyond simple survival. Victor came to visit that evening, appearing in the doorway of my ICU room like a specter of justice emerging from the shadows. He had been discharged from the hospital 2 days earlier, his own injuries healed enough to return home, but he had stayed in town specifically to see me through my surgery. He wore a crisp charcoal suit and carried a briefcase that looked like it belonged in a courtroom, not a hospital. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his blue eyes sharp and focused despite the late hour. Elena, his smile was warm but professional. The smile of a man who knows how to compartmentalize emotion without being cold. You look remarkably good for someone who just had their chest cracked open. I feel like I've been hit by a truck, I admitted. But I'm alive. That's more than Marcus was planning. Indeed it is. Victor glanced at Camilla, who had looked up from her phone with curiosity. Would you mind giving us a moment? I have some matters to discuss with your mother. Legal matters. Camilla looked at me, uncertain, clearly wondering why a federal judge she had never met was visiting her mother's hospital room. I nodded, squeezing her hand reassuringly. It's okay, sweetheart. Judge Ashford is a friend. An old friend from business school who happened to be in the hospital when I was admitted. He's been helping me with some estate planning. The lie came easily. Too easily, perhaps? I was already becoming the person I needed to be. The woman who could deceive as smoothly as she had been deceived. After Camilla left, closing the door behind her, with a final curious glance, Victor's expression shifted from warm to businesslike. He pulled a chair close to my bed and opened his briefcase, extracting a folder thick with documents that looked impressively official. I've been busy while you were in surgery, he said, keeping his voice low despite the closed door. My contacts at the FBI have begun their investigation into Morrison Development. The preliminary findings are significant, even more serious than we initially suspected. My heart rate spiked on the monitor, the numbers climbing as my anxiety manifested physically. But I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe slowly and steadily. Tell me everything. Over the past 7 years, Marcus has funneled approximately $4 million from the company into offshore accounts under various shell company names. He's been using falsified invoices, phantom contractors, and inflated expense reports to hide the theft. The forensic accountant I hired has traced at least 20 separate transactions that appear to be fraudulent, with more being uncovered daily. $4 million. The number hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath more effectively than the surgery had. I had trusted Marcus with our finances for years, had believed him when he said the company was doing well, had accepted his explanations about market fluctuations and development costs, and the unpredictability of the real estate market. All the while, he had been systematically stealing from the business we had built together. The business that was legally half mine. There's more, Victor continued, his voice grim with the weight of what he was about to reveal. The investigation has also uncovered evidence that Marcus has been maintaining a separate household for the past 3 years. An apartment in Henderson, a luxury condo in a high-rise building, paid for with company funds disguised as a corporate rental for visiting clients. In reality, his mistress has been living there full-time. Credit card records show regular purchases of jewelry, clothing, and luxury goods, all charged to Morrison Development as client entertainment expenses. 3 years. He had been living a double life for 3 years, and I had never suspected. I had been so focused on being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect partner, that I hadn't noticed my husband was building an entire second life with another woman. 3 years of lies. 3 years of stolen money. 3 years of making me feel guilty for my occasional paranoia, while he was proving that paranoia justified. The apartment, I said slowly, my mind racing despite the fog of medication. Is that where she has my grandmother's pendant? Victor nodded, his expression hardening with shared outrage. Among other things, our investigators found photographs on her social media accounts, private accounts, supposedly, but nothing is truly private anymore, showing her wearing various pieces of jewelry that match descriptions of items missing from your home. A diamond pendant, emerald earrings, a sapphire bracelet. She's been systematically stealing from you for years, with Marcus's full knowledge and assistance, flaunting her stolen treasures online like trophies. The rage that had been simmering inside me since I first heard them in my hospital room finally boiled over. I had tried to stay calm, tried to be strategic, tried to focus on survival and revenge in equal measure. But hearing that they had been robbing me blind for years, that every late night at the office and every business trip had been a lie, that my grandmother's pendant, the last physical connection to a woman I had loved more than life itself, had been a trophy displayed on some other woman's social media for 3 years. It was too much. I want them destroyed, I said, my voice cold and hard in a way I had never heard from myself before. I want them to lose everything they have, everything they stole, everything they ever cared about. That's the plan. Victor's smile was predatory, the smile of a hunter who has spent his life tracking dangerous prey. But we need to be patient and methodical. The FBI is building a case, but it takes time. Federal investigations move slowly by design, and we want to make sure, when we strike, there's no escape, no technicalities, no loopholes, no expensive lawyers finding procedural errors. How long? A few weeks? Perhaps a month. They're gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, subpoenaing financial records from banks and shell companies across multiple jurisdictions. When they have enough, they'll move on Marcus and Brittany simultaneously. Fraud charges, embezzlement charges, and if the evidence supports it, conspiracy to commit murder. The last phrase sent a chill through me. Conspiracy to commit murder. That was what they had planned for me. They had stood in my hospital room and discussed letting me die so they could take my money and live happily ever after. They had weighed my life against a vacation in Bali and found me wanting. They deserved every charge Victor's team could throw at them, and then some. What do I need to do? I asked, ready to throw myself into whatever role was required. Right now, recover. Get strong. Your body needs time to heal, and you need to be at full strength for what's coming. Victor leaned forward, his expression intense and serious. When you're discharged from the hospital, you'll need to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Marcus can't know we're investigating him, or he'll try to hide evidence, move assets, possibly even flee the country. This is the hardest part, Elena. You have to go home to the man who tried to kill you and pretend everything is fine. Can you do that? I thought about sleeping in the bed I had shared with Marcus for 18 years, knowing what I knew now. I thought about sitting across from him at breakfast, watching him eat the food I prepared, listening to his lies, and smiling like I believed every word. I thought about the rage that would have to stay buried, the mask I would have to wear every moment of every day. I thought about the actress I would have to become. I can do anything if it means watching him go to prison. Victor nodded, satisfied with my resolve. Good. In the meantime, I'm arranging for private security. Professionals who will watch the house discreetly, who will be available if you need help. And I want you to document everything. Every conversation, every suspicious behavior, every time Marcus does something that seems unusual. Keep a journal hidden somewhere safe. Take photographs when you can. Record conversations if possible. The more evidence we have, the stronger the case becomes. What about Camila? The thought of my daughter had been gnawing at me since I woke up. She can't know about any of this. If she finds out what her father did, she'll be devastated, Victor finished. I understand. We'll keep her out of it as long as possible. But eventually, Elena, the truth is going to come out. When Marcus is arrested, when the charges are filed, it will be in every newspaper. Your daughter will have to face the reality of who her father really is. I closed my eyes, the weight of that future pressing down on me. Camilla adored her father. Despite his absences, despite his workaholic tendencies, she had always believed he loved her, loved us, loved our family. Finding out that he had betrayed us all, that he had planned her mother's death for insurance money, it would shatter her. I'll tell her myself, and I said, before the arrest. She deserves to hear it from me, not from a news report. That's probably wise. Victor gathered his papers and returned them to his briefcase. I'll be in touch with updates. In the meantime, focus on healing. The strongest weapon you have right now is time. Time to recover, time to gather evidence, time to let Marcus grow comfortable and complacent. After Victor left, I lay in my hospital bed and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing despite the exhaustion weighing down my body. $4 million, 3 years of double life. An apartment where his mistress wore my jewelry and waited for me to die. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, far worse than I had imagined, even in my darkest moments. Marcus finally showed up the next morning, arriving with coffee and apologies and that smooth, practiced charm that had fooled me for nearly 2 decades. He kissed my forehead, held my hand, expressed profound relief that I had survived the surgery. His performance was flawless, worthy of an Academy Award. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed every word. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here yesterday," he said, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "The Henderson project, there was a crisis with the permits. I tried to get away, but by the time I resolved everything, visiting hours were over." "It's okay," I heard myself say. "Camilla was here. I wasn't alone. Still, I should have been here. You're my wife. You almost died." He shook his head, the picture of remorseful devotion. "I'm taking time off, clearing my schedule. For the next few weeks, I'm going to be here for you, whatever you need." The irony was so thick, I nearly choked on it. A week ago, he had been planning to cancel my surgery and let me die. Now he was promising to be my devoted caretaker. The whiplash would have been comical if it wasn't so horrifying. "Thank you, Marcus." I forced a smile. "That means a lot." I watched him through new eyes as he settled into the chair beside my bed, pulling out his phone to check messages, already distracted by whatever crisis demanded his attention. This was the man I had married, the father of my child, the partner I had trusted with everything. And he was a stranger, a monster wearing a human mask. As he scrolled through his phone, I noticed something. A flicker of something soft crossing his face. The ghost of a smile quickly suppressed. He was reading a message from her, from Brittany. Sitting beside his wife's hospital bed, hours after her life-saving surgery, he was texting his mistress. I committed every detail to memory. The time, the expression on his face, the way he angled his phone away from me so I couldn't see the screen. Evidence. Victor had said to document everything. I was already building my case. The days in the hospital blurred together. A parade of tests and medications and physical therapy sessions that left me exhausted and aching. Marcus visited daily, maintaining his performance of devoted husband, always with an excuse for why he couldn't stay longer, always with that distracted look that told me his mind was elsewhere. Camilla was there more reliably, her love genuine where her father's was counterfeit. On the 5th day after surgery, Dr. Harrison came to discuss my discharge. "You've recovered remarkably well," he said, reviewing my chart with evident satisfaction. "Your vitals are stable, the incision is healing nicely, and your cardiac function has improved significantly. I see no reason you can't continue your recovery at home as long as you follow all the post-operative instructions and attend your follow-up appointments." Home. The word felt strange now, like a foreign language I had once spoken fluently but had forgotten. The house on the hill wasn't home anymore. It was a crime scene, a trap, a gilded cage where my husband had planned my death. "When can I leave?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, if your blood work comes back clear." Marcus was there for the discharge, playing the part of the attentive husband one last time. He helped me into a wheelchair, pushed me through the hospital corridors, assisted me into the car he had brought around to the entrance. Every touch made my skin crawl, but I smiled and thanked him and pretended to be grateful. As we pulled away from the hospital, I looked back at the building where I had almost died, where a stranger had saved my life, where I had learned the truth about my marriage. I was leaving as a different person, harder, colder, more dangerous than Marcus could possibly imagine. The house looked the same as always when we pulled into the driveway. The manicured lawn, the rose garden I had tended for years, the infinity pool glinting in the afternoon sun. But everything felt different now, tainted, like a beautiful painting discovered to be a forgery. Marcus helped me inside, settled me on the couch in the living room, surrounded me with pillows and blankets like I was a precious invalid. "I want you to rest," he said. "Don't worry about anything. I'll handle everything. The cooking, the cleaning, whatever you need." "Thank you," I said, and the words tasted like ash in my mouth. As he bustled around the kitchen, I looked around the room I had decorated with such care over the years. The art on the walls, the photos on the mantelpiece, the furniture we had chosen together when we first moved in. Everything was a reminder of the life I thought I had, the marriage I thought was real. Everything was a lie. My phone buzzed with a text message. Victor. "Everything in place. Security team watching the house. Stay strong." I deleted the message and slipped my phone back into my pocket. The game had begun. I was back in the lion's den, surrounded by predators who thought I was prey. They had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. No idea at all that the prey had become the true predator, waiting so patiently for that perfect moment to strike back. The first week at home was an exercise in sustained deception that tested every limit of my self-control. I played the part of the recovering wife with an Oscar-worthy performance, accepting Marcus's ministrations with grateful smiles while documenting his every move in a journal I kept hidden in the false bottom of my jewelry box. The irony of hiding evidence in a jewelry box that Brittany had been systematically looting wasn't lost on me. It was almost poetic in its bitter justice. Marcus threw himself into the role of devoted husband with suspicious enthusiasm. He cooked breakfast every morning. Or rather, he ordered breakfast from the gourmet catering service and arranged it artfully on plates as if he had slaved over a hot stove himself. He helped me with my physical therapy exercises, his hands on my body making my skin crawl with revulsion I had to mask as gratitude. He brought me flowers every other day, magazines from my favorite shops, the expensive Belgian chocolates I used to love before I knew they were purchased with money stolen from our company. He performed devotion like a man who had studied the concept in a textbook but never actually experienced the emotion. "Anything you need," he would say several times a day, hovering over me with that concerned expression he must have practiced in the mirror. "Just ask. I'm here for you, Elena, whatever it takes." Every time he said it, I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw those flowers in his face and demand to know how he could stand there playing nursemaid to the woman he had tried to murder. I wanted to ask him if Brittany was waiting in their secret love nest in Henderson, wearing my grandmother's pendant while she counted down the days until I was dead and they could finally be together openly. I wanted to ask him how much longer he planned to continue this charade, this performance of husbandly devotion that couldn't have felt more hollow if he had been reading from a script. But I said nothing. I smiled and thanked him and let him believe his performance was working. Because every day I stayed quiet was another day Victor's team gathered evidence. Every day I pretended was another nail in the coffin of Marcus Morrison's freedom. Every day I played the grateful patient was another step toward the moment when I would watch his world collapse around him. Victor called me every evening, always at 9 o'clock when Marcus was downstairs watching the evening news, always from a blocked number that couldn't be traced if Marcus happened to check my phone records. We spoke in careful, coded language about my recovery and my physical therapy and the progress I was making. But we both knew what we were really discussing: the investigation, the evidence, the trap that was slowly and inexorably closing around my husband like a steel jaw. "The forensic accountants have found something significant," Victor told me during our third week of calls, his voice low and intense through the phone speaker I held against my ear. "A series of wire transfers from Morrison Development to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The shell company then purchased a property in Brittany Walker's name, a beachfront villa on Grand Cayman worth approximately $800,000. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went white. He bought her a house, with money from our company, money that should have been building Camilla's inheritance. It appears so. The property was purchased 18 months ago, around the time the affair apparently became serious enough for long-term planning. The deed is in her name alone, which suggests Marcus was already preparing for a future where you weren't in the picture. A future where he needed assets hidden from divorce proceedings or inheritance claims. I thought about all the business trips Marcus had taken over the past 2 years, the conferences in Miami, the site visits in Phoenix, the client meetings in New York. How many of them had been legitimate? How many had been secret vacations with his mistress to their beach house in the Caribbean, sipping cocktails on their stolen terrace, while I sat home alone, wondering why my husband never seemed to have time for the anniversary trips we used to take. "Can we get it back?" I asked, my voice harder than I had ever heard it. "The property, the money, can we recover any of it?" "That's the plan. Once charges are filed, the government will move to seize assets acquired through fraudulent means. The villa will almost certainly be forfeited to the state. The shell company accounts will be frozen and eventually liquidated. And everything Marcus tried to hide behind layers of corporate structures and offshore banking will become evidence in the case against him." I allowed myself a small smile. There in the darkness of my bedroom, while Marcus watched television downstairs, oblivious to the conversation happening above his head. He thought he was so clever, hiding his theft behind shell companies and foreign jurisdictions and the kind of financial complexity that ordinary people couldn't navigate. But he had underestimated Victor Ashford, a man who had spent 30 years unraveling exactly these kinds of schemes. And he had underestimated me, the woman he had dismissed as a boring, predictable wife who wouldn't notice when her jewelry went missing and her money disappeared into offshore accounts. The money he had stolen would be returned. The life he had built with Brittany would be destroyed. And the future he had planned, the one where I was dead and he was rich and free, would never come to pass. The second week brought an unexpected complication that threw a wrench into my carefully maintained facade. Camilla announced she was extending her stay. "I've talked to my professors," she said over dinner. Another catered meal that Marcus was pretending he had cooked, complete with the chef's logo napkins he had forgotten to remove from the delivery bag. "They're letting me do the rest of the semester remotely. Online classes, video conferences with my study groups. I want to be here for your recovery, Mom. I want to help take care of you." I felt a surge of love and terror in equal measure, my heart swelling. With maternal pride, even as my mind raced through the complications. My daughter's devotion was touching. A reminder that at least some of my relationships were built on genuine emotion rather than calculated deception. But her presence complicated everything in ways she couldn't possibly understand. With Camilla in the house, Marcus was even more careful about his performance. He couldn't slip away to visit Brittany without explanation. He couldn't have private phone conversations without risk of being overheard. He couldn't even text his mistress without looking over his shoulder to make sure his daughter wasn't watching. In some ways, her presence was protection. He would never dare harm me with a witness in the house, especially his beloved daughter. But it also meant I couldn't meet with Victor in person, couldn't discuss the investigation openly, couldn't make preparations for the confrontation that was coming without risking discovery. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand with genuine warmth. "I'm so glad you'll be here. There's nowhere I'd rather have you." Marcus smiled, but I caught the flicker of frustration in his eyes before he composed his features into an expression of paternal satisfaction. He was trapped too, I realized with a spark of dark pleasure. Trapped by his own daughter's love, forced to maintain his charade of devoted fatherhood while his mistress waited for him in Henderson, probably wondering why his visits had become so infrequent. 3 weeks into my recovery, Brittany made her first appearance at our home, a move so audacious, so breathtakingly arrogant that for a moment I wondered if she was testing me, trying to see how much I really knew. I was resting in the living room, propped up on the couch with a book I wasn't really reading, when the doorbell rang. Marcus answered it, and I heard his voice change, the fake cheerfulness replaced by something warmer, more genuine, more alive. The voice he used with her, the voice he used to use with me, back when our love was new and I still believed in fairy tales. "Elena, darling, we have a visitor." He led a woman into the living room, and I found myself face to face with my husband's mistress for the first time since that terrible day in the hospital when I had lain sedated and helpless while they discussed my death. She was younger than I remembered, or perhaps I had simply been too drugged to notice the details before. Mid-20s, with the kind of polished beauty that required hours of maintenance and thousands of dollars in cosmetic procedures. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, falling in waves that probably cost $200 at some trendy salon. Her makeup was flawless, her nails impeccable, her designer outfit probably purchased with money from my company. And around her neck, glinting in the afternoon light like a beacon of betrayal, was my grandmother's pendant. "Elena, this is Brittany Walker. She's our new office manager at Morrison Development." Marcus's voice was smooth, practiced, without a hint of nervousness, despite the audacity of what he was doing. "She wanted to stop by and wish you a speedy recovery." I stared at the pendant, the diamond teardrop that my grandmother had worn on her wedding day, that she had treasured through 60 years of marriage to my grandfather. The pendant my mother had given me when I married Marcus, passing down a family heirloom with tears of joy in her eyes, telling me that this diamond had witnessed 3 generations of happy marriages, and now it would witness mine. And there it was, hanging around the neck of the woman who had stood in my hospital room and discussed the most efficient way to let me die so she could claim my jewelry, my house, my life. "How thoughtful," I heard myself say, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "Thank you for coming, Miss Walker. Please, call me Brittany." She smiled, and the expression didn't reach her eyes. Those calculating eyes that were probably assessing me, wondering how much longer I would be an obstacle to her plans. "Marcus has told me so much about you. I'm so glad you're recovering well." I wanted to rip that pendant from her throat. I wanted to scream at her, to expose her for what she was, to demand she get out of my house and never come back. I wanted to ask her how she could stand there wearing stolen jewelry, making small talk with the woman she had tried to murder, and smile like butter wouldn't melt in her perfectly glossed mouth. But I did none of those things. Instead, I smiled and thanked her and offered her a cup of tea, playing the gracious hostess while rage burned in my chest like acid eating through steel. "That's a beautiful pendant," I said, gesturing toward the necklace with what I hoped was casual interest. "It looks antique." Brittany's hand went to her throat, her fingers touching the diamond with possessive satisfaction, the gesture of a woman displaying a trophy she's particularly proud of winning. "Oh, this? Marcus gave it to me. He said it was a family heirloom that he wanted me to have." A family heirloom. He had told her it was a family heirloom, which, technically, it was, just not his family. My family. My grandmother's legacy, reduced to a gift for his mistress, given as casually as if it were costume jewelry from a department store clearance rack. "It suits you," I said, and the lie tasted like poison. "You should cherish it." Marcus hovered nervously during the visit, clearly uncomfortable with the collision of his 2 worlds, despite being the one who had orchestrated this meeting. Brittany stayed for exactly 1 cup of tea, making small talk about the office and the weather and her hopes for my speedy recovery. She spoke to me with the barely concealed contempt of a woman who believes she has already won, who sees me as an obstacle soon to be removed rather than a rival. Worth respecting. When she finally left, kissing Marcus on the cheek in a gesture that was just slightly too intimate for a mere office manager, I waited until her expensive car pulled out of the driveway before I spoke. "She seems nice," I said, watching Marcus's face carefully for any crack in his facade. "How long has she been working for us?" "About 3 years." He couldn't meet my eyes. "She's been very helpful with the day-to-day operations while I focus on development." 3 years. The same 3 years he had been maintaining that secret apartment. The same 3 years she had been systematically stealing my jewelry, my money, my husband. The same 3 years I had been a fool, believing his excuses about late nights and business trips, while he built a whole second life with another woman. "I'm tired," I said, closing my eyes. "I think I'll take a nap." That night, I called Victor from the bathroom with the shower running to mask my voice, steam filling the room like fog as I whispered my fury into the phone. "She was here," I hissed, barely containing my rage. "In my house, wearing my grandmother's pendant like a trophy. And Marcus introduced her as the office manager, as if that explains why she's visiting his sick wife at home." "I know." The security team reported her arrival. Victor's voice was calm, professional. The voice of a man who has seen every kind of depravity and learned not to be shocked by any of it. "Did she say anything incriminating?" "Nothing overt. She was careful, played the concerned colleague perfectly. But the pendant, Victor, she was wearing stolen jewelry right in front of me, and Marcus gave it to her. He told her it was a family heirloom he wanted her to have. That's actually useful from an evidentiary standpoint. It establishes her as a knowing recipient of stolen property. She can't claim she didn't know the jewelry was his wife's. Another charge to add to the list, another nail in her coffin." I leaned against the bathroom wall, water streaming down around me, my heart pounding with residual rage and something else, a cold, calculating satisfaction that felt foreign and exhilarating, like discovering a new room in a house I thought I knew completely. How much longer? A few more days. The FBI is preparing the arrest warrants as we speak. They want to move simultaneously on Marcus, Brittany, and 2 of their accomplices, an accountant named Gerald Simmons, who helped falsify records, and a lawyer named David Chen, who set up the shell companies. When we strike, we're taking them all down at once. No warnings, no chance to flee. And then justice. But Elena, I need you to be prepared for what comes next. The arrest will be public. The charges will be in every newspaper, on every television news program. Your daughter will learn the truth, whether you've told her or not." I closed my eyes, thinking of Camila asleep in her childhood bedroom down the hall, surrounded by the posters and trophies and memories of a happy childhood that was about to be rewritten in the light of her father's betrayal. She had come home to care for me, and in return, I was about to destroy her world. "I'll tell her tomorrow," I said, "before everything falls apart. She deserves to know." The conversation with Camila was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than lying in that hospital bed listening to my husband plan my murder. Harder than pretending to be grateful for Brittany's well wishes while she wore my grandmother's pendant like a victor's medal. Harder than any of the countless small deaths I had experienced in the weeks since my world fell apart. I chose to tell her in the garden, away from the house and any ears that might be listening. We sat on the bench beside the roses I had planted the year she was born. The roses I had tended through drought and frost and all the seasons of our lives together. She looked at me with trust in her eyes, this daughter I had raised and loved and protected from every harm I could anticipate. But I couldn't protect her from this. "Camila, I need to tell you something. Something that's going to be very difficult to hear." Her expression shifted from curious to wary. "What is it, Mom? You're scaring me." "When I was in the hospital, before my surgery, I heard something. A conversation between your father and Brittany Walker, the office manager who came to visit." "What kind of conversation?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. "They were planning to let me die. They wanted your father to cancel my surgery so they could use the money for a vacation. They were discussing my death like it was a business transaction, and they were looking forward to inheriting everything I had." Camilla's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, the beginnings of horror. Mom, that's insane. Dad would never." "I heard it myself, sweetheart. I was sedated, but I heard every word. And there was a witness. Judge Ashford, the man who was in the bed next to mine. He heard it too, and he's been helping me investigate." "Investigate? What do you mean, investigate?" "Your father has been embezzling from the company for years, millions of dollars funneled into offshore accounts. He's been maintaining a secret apartment with Brittany. He bought her a house in the Caribbean with stolen money. And the jewelry that's been going missing from my collection, the pendant she was wearing yesterday. He's been giving it all to her. The tears started then, rolling down Camila's cheeks as the truth sank in. I watched my daughter's world crumble, watched the image of her father, the man she had admired and loved and defended, shatter into 1,000 pieces. I can't. She was hyperventilating, struggling to breathe. How long? How long has this been going on? At least 3 years? Maybe longer? 3 years. She repeated the words like they were a death sentence. 3 years of lies. 3 years of pretending to be a family while he was... She couldn't finish the sentence. I pulled her into my arms, holding her the way I had when she was a little girl, crying over scraped knees and mean classmates. But there was no kiss that could make this better. No bandage that could cover this wound. Her father had betrayed us both, and no amount of motherly comfort could undo that damage. The FBI is going to arrest him, I said, when her sobs had quieted enough for her to hear. In the next few days, I wanted you to know before it happened. I wanted you to hear it from me. She pulled back, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Good, she said, and the word was hard, sharp, filled with a rage I had never heard from my gentle daughter. I hope they throw away the key. That evening, Victor called with the news I had been waiting for. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., the FBI will arrive with arrest warrants. By noon, all 4 of them will be in federal custody. And the charges? Wire fraud, bank fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder. I gripped the phone tighter. Is there anything I need to do? Just be ready. Try to get some sleep tonight. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to the man I had loved, the man who had betrayed me in every conceivable way. And I stared at the ceiling while the minutes ticked past like hours. Beside me, Marcus slept the peaceful sleep of the oblivious, his breathing deep and steady, his conscience apparently unburdened by guilt. How could he sleep so soundly? How could he lie beside the woman he had tried to kill and drift off as if everything was normal? I watched him in the dim light filtering through the curtains. This man who had shared my bed for 18 years, who had fathered my child, who had built a life with me only to tear it down brick by brick. In a few hours, FBI agents would be at our door with handcuffs and arrest warrants. In a few hours, the life he had constructed so carefully, the devoted husband, the successful businessman, the loving father, would collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. Did he sense it coming? In his dreams, did some part of him know that judgment was approaching? Or was he so confident in his deception, so certain of his own cleverness, that the possibility of consequences had never even crossed his mind? I thought about all the plans he had made. The villa in the Caribbean where he and Brittany would live after my death. The millions he had hidden in offshore accounts, waiting to fund their new life together. The future he had sketched out in such careful detail. A future that required my corpse as its foundation. None of it would happen now. Instead of a beach house and a young mistress, he was going to get a prison cell and criminal charges. Instead of inheriting my fortune, he was going to lose everything he had ever stolen. Instead of walking away from our marriage as a wealthy widower, he was going to be led away in handcuffs while I watched. The thought filled me with a dark, fierce satisfaction that warmed me like a fire on a winter night. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Everything would change when the sun rose. Marcus Morrison would learn that the wife he had tried to murder was very much alive, and she was coming for absolutely everything he had ever valued. The knock came at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, just as Victor had promised. 3 sharp raps on the front door, followed by a voice that cut through the early morning silence like a knife through silk, authoritative and unmistakable. FBI, open the door. I was already awake, already dressed in the navy blue dress I had chosen specifically for this moment, already positioned in the living room where I could witness everything that was about to unfold. Camilla sat beside me on the couch, her face pale but determined, her hand gripping mine with a strength that belied her trembling. We had been waiting for hours, neither of us able to sleep, counting down the minutes until the moment of reckoning arrived. The grandfather clock in the foyer had ticked through each second like a heartbeat, marking time until justice finally knocked on our door. Marcus stumbled down the stairs in his bathrobe, confusion and irritation warring on his face as he tried to process the sounds that had woken him. His hair was disheveled, his eyes puffy with sleep, and for a moment he looked like the man I had married, vulnerable, human, almost sympathetic. But I knew better now. I knew what lurked beneath that ordinary exterior. "What the hell is going on? Elena, did you call someone? Why are you already dressed?" "I didn't call anyone in," I said, and my voice was steady as stone, calm as still water. "But I think you should answer the door, Marcus. They don't sound like they're going to wait." He shot me a suspicious look, his sleep-fogged brain finally registering that something was very wrong with this picture. His wife, already dressed and composed at 6 a.m. His daughter sitting beside her, holding her hand. The pounding on the door that was growing more insistent with each passing second. I watched him cross the foyer on unsteady legs, watched him fumble with the deadbolt while the knocking continued, watched him finally pull open the door to reveal a wall of federal agents in dark jackets with FBI emblazoned across the back in bright yellow letters. Marcus Morrison? The lead agent was a tall woman with steel gray hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that had seen every kind of criminal imaginable. She held up a badge and a folded document with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. "I'm Special Agent Catherine Webb, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest." "What? That's ridiculous. There must be some mistake." Marcus's voice climbed with panic, all his smooth composure crumbling like a sandcastle in a hurricane. The confident businessman, the charming husband, the man who had fooled me for nearly 2 decades. All of it evaporated in an instant, leaving nothing but a frightened middle-aged man in a bathrobe facing down a squad of federal agents. "I haven't done anything wrong. This is my house. I'm a respected businessman. You can't just—" "Sir, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Agent Webb's voice was calm, almost bored, as if she had done this 1,000 times before and found it utterly routine. 2 agents stepped forward to flank Marcus, their movements coordinated and professional. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." I rose from the couch and walked toward the foyer, my heels clicking on the marble floor with each deliberate step. I positioned myself where Marcus could see me clearly, where our eyes could meet as the agents spun him around and snapped the handcuffs onto his wrists. Those wrists that had held me through countless nights. Those hands that had touched me while belonging to another woman. Those fingers that had signed the documents diverting millions of dollars away from our company. "Elena." His voice was a plea, a demand, a desperate grasp at a lifeline that wasn't there. His eyes were wild, searching my face for some sign of the obedient wife who would rush to his defense, who would tell these agents that there had been a terrible mistake. "Elena, tell them this is a mistake. Tell them I didn't do anything wrong. You know me. We've been married for 18 years. I can't tell them that, Marcus." I kept my voice level, controlled, each word dropping like ice into the space between us. "Because I know exactly what you did. I heard every word you said in that hospital room. Every single word. I heard you planning to cancel my surgery with Brittany standing right beside you. I heard you discussing how to let me die so you could take everything I had and start your new life together." The color drained from his face so completely that for a moment he looked like a corpse himself, like the dead woman he had wanted me to become. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The reality of what was happening was finally breaking through his denial. You You were awake? You heard everything? Every single word. I stepped closer, close enough to see the terror blooming in his eyes like a dark flower, close enough to watch his world collapse in real time. The surgery money you wanted to steal, the honeymoon in Bali you promised her, the life insurance payout you were counting. I heard it all, Marcus. And so did Judge Victor Ashford, who happened to be in the bed next to mine. A federal appeals court judge who has spent the last 30 years putting men exactly like you behind bars. This is insane. This is completely insane. You're lying. You must be lying. But his voice had no conviction, no force behind it. The facade that had fooled me for nearly 2 decades had crumbled completely, leaving nothing but a desperate, cornered animal facing the consequences of his actions. Am I lying, Marcus? I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. A video file labeled Hospital Security Footage, Room 412. The hospital has security cameras in every room in the cardiac unit, standard practice for patient monitoring. Those cameras captured your entire conversation, your face, her face, the pendant she was wearing around her neck, my grandmother's pendant, the one you stole from my jewelry box and gave to her like it was yours to give. He stared at the phone like it was a weapon pointed at his head, which in many ways it was. Elena, please, I can explain. We can work this out. Whatever you think happened, I can explain. Explain what, exactly? How you embezzled $4 million from our company over the past 7 years? How you funneled stolen money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands? How you bought your mistress a beachfront villa worth $800,000 with funds that should have been building our daughter's inheritance? How you've been systematically stealing my jewelry for 3 years and giving it to the woman you plan to replace me with. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. I watched him flinch with every revelation, watched the last vestiges of hope drain from his face as he realized the scope of what I knew, what Victor knew, what the FBI knew. Agent Webb stepped forward with professional impatience. Sir, we really need to go. We have a schedule to maintain. Wait. Marcus twisted against the handcuffs, his desperation making him reckless, making him say things he should have had the sense to keep to himself. Elena, listen to me. Please just listen. I love you. Everything I did was for us. For our family. I was trying to build something for our future. You don't have a family anymore. The words came from behind me, and I turned to see Camilla standing in the living room doorway, her face wet with tears, but her voice as hard and sharp as a blade. My daughter had become a woman in the span of these terrible weeks, forged in the fire of betrayal into something stronger than I had ever imagined. You threw away your family the moment you planned to let Mom die for money. You don't get to claim us anymore. You don't get to pretend this was about love. Camilla, sweetheart, please try to understand. I understand perfectly, Dad. She walked toward him, and I saw the transformation happen in real time. The girl I had raised becoming the woman she was meant to be, strong and fierce and absolutely unbroken by this betrayal. I understand that you're a thief and a liar and a would-be murderer. I understand that every single thing you ever told me about love and family and loyalty was a lie. I understand that you would have let my mother die for money, for a vacation, for some woman half your age who wanted to wear her jewelry. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the contempt burning in her eyes. And I understand that I never want to see your face again for as long as I live. You're not my father anymore. You're nothing to me. Less than nothing. Marcus's composure finally shattered completely. Tears streamed down his face as the agents began to lead him toward the door, his legs barely able to support him, his entire body shaking with sobs. Please, he cried, his voice breaking on the word. Please, Elena, don't do this. I'll give everything back. I'll end things with Brittany. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, please don't send me to prison. Please. I followed them to the doorway, watching as they guided my husband, no, my soon-to-be ex-husband, down the front steps toward the waiting vehicles. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and I thought how strange it was that such a beautiful day should be the backdrop for such an ugly scene. How nature continued on, indifferent to human tragedy, making no distinction between justice and catastrophe. "Marcus," I called out, and he turned his head, hope flickering in his eyes like a candle in the wind. Maybe he thought I was going to stop this. Maybe he thought 18 years of marriage would finally move me to mercy. Maybe he still believed, even now, that he could manipulate me one last time. I smiled. Not the gentle, accommodating smile of the wife I used to be, the woman who had spent nearly 2 decades smoothing over his rough edges and making excuses for his failures. This was something colder, something that matched the ice that had formed in my heart during those terrible hours in the hospital, listening to him plan my death. "I hope you rot." They put him in the back of a black SUV, his face pressed against the tinted window, still sobbing, still pleading, even though I could no longer hear the words. I stood on the porch and watched until the vehicle pulled away, until it disappeared around the corner, until the man who had tried to murder me was gone from my sight forever. Victor arrived an hour later, stepping out of a town car with the satisfied expression of a general surveying a successful battlefield. He wore an impeccable charcoal suit and carried a briefcase stuffed with folders. The tangible evidence of months of investigation finally bearing fruit. "It's done," he said, settling into a chair in my living room. Brittany Walker was arrested at her apartment in Henderson at precisely 6:02. She was still in bed when the agents arrived, wearing the pendant, I'm told. She tried to claim it was a gift, that she had no idea where it came from. The agents were not impressed by her performance. And the others? Gerald Simmons, the accountant, was taken into custody at 6:05 while having breakfast with his family. His wife started screaming at him in front of the children. David Chen, the lawyer who set up the shell companies, was arrested at 6:10 at his morning yoga class. The entire operation was textbook perfect. 4 simultaneous arrests, no warnings, no chance for any of them to flee or destroy evidence. "And the charges?" I asked. "They'll stick?" Beyond any reasonable doubt, the hospital footage alone is absolutely damning. Add the financial records showing years of systematic embezzlement, the shell company documents tracing the stolen money across international borders, the testimony of various bank officials and corporate employees who were unwitting participants in the scheme, and you have a case that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. Victor opened his briefcase and extracted a thick document. The preliminary charges include wire fraud, bank fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, receipt of stolen property, and, for Marcus and Brittany specifically, conspiracy to commit murder. Additional charges will likely be added as the investigation continues to uncover the full scope of the fraud. Murder. I repeated the word, tasting its weight on my tongue. They're actually charging him with murder? Conspiracy to commit murder, Victor corrected. The legal argument is that deliberately withholding life-saving medical treatment with the explicit intent to cause death constitutes a form of murder. It's an aggressive charge, certainly, but the evidence overwhelmingly supports it. The hospital footage shows Marcus explicitly stating that he wanted to cancel your surgery specifically so that you would die and he could inherit your assets. That's not negligence. That's not accident. That's premeditated intent to cause death through deliberate inaction. Camilla, who had been listening from the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, spoke up. How long will he go to prison? That depends on many factors, the specific charges that ultimately stick, the judge assigned to the case, any plea bargains that might be offered. Victor's expression was grave, but not without a hint of professional satisfaction. However, if he's convicted on all counts, and I believe he will be, we're looking at a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. More likely, 20 to 25. And federal sentences mean no parole. He'll serve every single day. 25 years. I let that number sink in. Let it settle into the place where my marriage used to live. Marcus was 52 years old. 25 years would make him 77 when he finally walked free. An old man with nothing to show for his schemes and betrayals. His prime years, his wealth, his freedom, all of it gone. The future he had planned with Brittany, the beach house, and the stolen millions, and the life of luxury built on my grave, all of it ashes. What about the assets? I asked. The money he stole, the property, everything he hid in those offshore accounts? The government will move to seize everything connected to the fraud. The villa in the Caymans will be sold at auction. The shell company accounts will be frozen and eventually liquidated. Any assets that can be traced to embezzled funds will be forfeited to the state. Victor smiled, and there was something almost wolfish in the expression. The satisfaction of a hunter who has finally cornered his prey. Additionally, as the victim of the embezzlement scheme, a scheme that targeted you personally and professionally, you're entitled to restitution. The court will order Marcus to repay everything he stole with interest. And since Morrison Development was technically half yours under California community property law, you have standing to claim personal damages as well. So I get my money back? All of it? Eventually, yes. These things take time. The courts move slowly, especially when dealing with complex financial crimes and international asset recovery. But the forensic accountants have already traced most of the hidden funds across multiple jurisdictions. You should recover the substantial bulk of it within a year or two. I thought about the $4 million Marcus had stolen over the years, the jewelry he had systematically taken from my collection and given to his mistress like offerings to a false god, the years of lies and deception and financial manipulation that had undermined everything I thought I knew about my life. And I thought about the future that now stretched before me, a future where I controlled my own destiny, where no one could betray me without facing consequences, where the woman who had tried to replace me would be wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of my grandmother's pendant. There's one more thing, Victor said, reaching into his briefcase again. I took the liberty of having my attorneys draw up divorce papers. Given the extraordinary circumstances, criminal charges, conspiracy to commit murder, systematic fraud, no court in the country would deny you an immediate dissolution of the marriage. You can sign them today if you're ready. He handed me the documents, thick, official, covered in legal language and signature lines that seemed to go on forever. 18 years of marriage, reduced to paperwork. 18 years of trust and betrayal and love and deception, waiting to be ended with a stroke of my pen. I didn't hesitate, not for a second. I took the pen Victor offered and signed every page without pausing to read the fine print, my signature flowing across the paper like a declaration of independence. Elena Vasquez Morrison was dead, buried with all the lies and delusions and false hopes she had clung to for so long. Elena Vasquez was being reborn, rising from the ashes of her failed marriage like something new and powerful and free. One final formality, Victor said when I had finished signing. The court will need to address the division of marital assets. Given the criminal charges and the overwhelming evidence of fraud, my attorneys believe you should be entitled to the entirety of Morrison Development, not just the standard 50% community property split. Marcus forfeited his rights to marital property when he committed crimes against you using company funds. You mean I'd own the whole company? Everything? Every share, every property in the portfolio, every dollar in the corporate accounts, every deal in progress, and every asset on the books. Victor's smile was triumphant, the smile of a man who had won a battle he had been fighting for 7 long years. Marcus Morrison tried to kill you to inherit your wealth. Instead, he's going to federal prison for decades, and you're going to inherit everything he tried to steal from you. The poetic justice of it was so perfect, so absolutely complete, that I almost laughed out loud. Almost. But laughing felt wrong somehow, too light-hearted for the gravity of what had happened. Instead, I simply nodded, accepting this final twist of fate with the same cold composure I had maintained throughout the morning. "Thank you, Victor." The words felt inadequate for everything he had done, saving my life in that hospital, launching the investigation, coordinating with the FBI, building the case that had just destroyed Marcus's world. "I don't know how I can ever repay you. You saved my life, not just in the hospital, but everything since then. You would have survived, Elena. You're stronger than you know, stronger than Marcus ever gave you credit for." He reached across and squeezed my hand briefly. "I simply provided the tools and the expertise. You're the one who wielded them. You're the one who had the courage to see this through." That afternoon, I received a phone call from Agent Webb. "Ms. Vasquez, I wanted to let you know that your husband has waived his right to remain silent. He's giving a full confession to every charge." "A confession?" I gripped the phone tighter. "He's admitting to everything?" "Everything, and then some. The embezzlement, the fraud, the shell companies, the affair, the plot to withhold your medical treatment. He's providing names, dates, account numbers, everything we asked for and more." Agent Webb's voice held a note of professional satisfaction mingled with something like contempt. "It seems his mistress turned on him the moment she was arrested. She started talking within 10 minutes of being read her rights, giving us everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. When your husband found out she was cooperating, he decided to do the same. They're both racing to see who can throw the other under the bus harder and faster." I thought about Brittany, the woman who had worn my jewelry and slept in my husband's arms and planned to take over my entire life. She had seemed so confident, so absolutely certain of her victory when she had walked into my home wearing my grandmother's pendant around her throat like a trophy. Now she was in a federal holding cell, betraying the man she had conspired with, fighting to minimize her own punishment, even if it meant destroying him completely in the process. There was no honor among thieves, it seemed, only self-preservation. That evening, Camilla and I sat on the back patio, watching the sunset over the pool I had never really enjoyed because I was always too busy being the perfect wife. The house was quiet now, empty of Marcus's presence in a way that felt like breathing clean air for the first time in years. "What are you going to do now?" Camilla asked. "Rebuild," I said. "Everything, on my own terms." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat together, watching the stars appear. Mother and daughter united by trauma and strengthened by survival. The man who had tried to destroy us was gone forever. The queen had reclaimed her throne. 6 months have passed since the morning the FBI came to my door and took Marcus Morrison away in handcuffs. 6 months of legal proceedings and court appearances and endless meetings with attorneys and accountants and federal investigators, piecing together the full scope of my husband's betrayal. 6 months of rebuilding a life I thought had been destroyed beyond repair. Of discovering strength I never knew I possessed. Of watching the empire Marcus built on lies and theft crumble into dust. The trial was a spectacle that dominated the local news for weeks. Every day brought new revelations, new evidence of Marcus's corruption, new witnesses stepping forward to testify about the man they had once trusted and feared. The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision, each piece of evidence clicking into place like parts of a puzzle that painted a devastating portrait of a career criminal who had hidden behind the facade of a respectable businessman for decades. The hospital security footage was played on the first day of trial, projected on a large screen for the jury and the packed courtroom to witness. I watched it again, sitting in the gallery with Camilla's hand gripping mine, reliving those terrible moments when I had lain helpless in my hospital bed while my husband and his mistress discussed my murder as casually as they might discuss dinner reservations. The footage was even more damning than I had imagined. Every word captured clearly, every callous laugh, every tender touch between Marcus and Brittany as they stood over my sedated body, planning how to spend the money they would inherit from my death. The jury's faces told the story. I watched them watch the footage, saw their expressions shift from curiosity to disbelief to horror to outrage. These were ordinary people, accountants and teachers and small business owners, and they understood instantly what they were seeing. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was premeditated evil, cold and calculated and utterly without remorse. Marcus sat at the defense table throughout the footage, his face carefully blank, his expensive lawyers flanking him like bodyguards. But I saw the moment when something broke behind his eyes, the moment when he realized that no amount of charm or manipulation was going to save him from the consequences of what he had done. 7 years ago, he had escaped justice through technicalities and procedural errors. This time, there were no loopholes. This time, the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic accountants testified for 3 full days, walking the jury through years of financial manipulation that left even the most experienced observers shaking their heads in disbelief. $4.2 million embezzled from Morrison Development over 7 years. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland and the British Virgin Islands, each one a layer of obfuscation designed to hide the flow of stolen money. Falsified invoices for contractors who didn't exist. Phantom expenses for materials never purchased. A web of fraud so intricate that Marcus must have spent years constructing it, even as he smiled across the dinner table and told me the company was doing well. The jewelry was recovered, every piece. Brittany had kept it all at the Henderson apartment, displayed in a velvet-lined case like a dragon's hoard of stolen treasure. My grandmother's diamond pendant, my mother's emerald earrings, the sapphire bracelet I had bought myself to celebrate Camilla's birth. Each piece was photographed and cataloged and presented to the jury as evidence of the systematic theft that had been occurring under my nose for 3 years. I had noticed things going missing, had even mentioned it to Marcus once or twice, and he had dismissed my concerns as absent-mindedness, had made me feel foolish for misplacing my own belongings. Another layer of gaslighting I hadn't recognized until it was far too late. Brittany Walker's testimony was perhaps the most damning of all. She had accepted a plea deal, 20 years in federal prison, in exchange for full cooperation with the prosecution. On the stand, she abandoned any pretense of loyalty to the man she had supposedly loved, instead painting a picture of Marcus as the mastermind who had orchestrated everything from their affair to the financial crimes to the plot against my life. He said his wife was boring and frigid and didn't appreciate him, Brittany told the court, her voice carrying the rehearsed quality of someone who had practiced this speech many times. He said she had inherited all this money but didn't know how to enjoy it, and he was tired of pretending to be happy in a loveless marriage. He said as soon as she was gone, we could finally be together openly. We could travel the world. We could live the life we deserved. I watched her testify. This woman who had stood in my hospital room wearing my grandmother's pendant and talked about sleeping in my bed. She was younger than I had realized, 26, barely older than Camilla. And in the harsh, fluorescent light of the courtroom, stripped of her designer clothes and expensive makeup, she looked almost pathetic. A foolish girl who had been seduced by promises of wealth and luxury, too blinded by greed to recognize that the man making those promises was a monster. But I felt no sympathy for her. She had known what Marcus was planning. She had encouraged him, had helped him, had stood over my hospital bed and discussed my death with anticipation in her voice. Whatever sentence she received, she had earned every day of it. Marcus's defense was weak from the start, hampered by the overwhelming evidence and by his own hubris. His lawyers tried to argue that Brittany had manipulated him, that the financial discrepancies were accounting errors rather than intentional fraud, that the hospital conversation had been taken out of context. But the jury wasn't buying any of it. They had seen the footage, they had heard the testimony, they had followed the money trail that led from Morrison Development to offshore accounts to a beachfront villa that Marcus had purchased for his mistress with funds that should have been building our daughter's future. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the trial began. I was there, of course, sitting in the front row of the gallery with Camila on one side and Victor on the other. The judge asked the foreman to read the verdict, and I held my breath as he stood, a piece of paper trembling slightly in his hands. On the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of bank fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Each word hit me like a physical blow, but these were blows of vindication rather than violence. Guilty. 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 5 times the word echoed through the courtroom, and 5 times I felt another piece of the weight I had been carrying lift from my shoulders. Justice, finally, after all the months of fear and fury and forced composure. Marcus collapsed in his chair as the verdict was read, his carefully maintained facade crumbling at last. I watched him weep, this man who had plotted my death without shedding a single tear, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. He had gambled everything on my silence, my ignorance, my blind trust, and he had lost. The sentencing hearing came a month later, after victim impact statements and character witnesses and endless legal arguments about mitigating factors and sentencing guidelines. I gave my own statement, standing at the podium facing the judge, while Marcus sat at the defense table unable to meet my eyes. I spoke about the 18 years of marriage I had believed in, the trust I had offered without reservation, the family I had built with a man who was secretly planning my destruction. I spoke about waking up in that hospital room to hear my husband discussing my murder with his mistress, about the terror and betrayal that had consumed me in that moment, about the strength I had found through the help of Judge Ashford and my daughter, and my own determination to survive. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions roiling inside me. Marcus Morrison didn't just steal my money, he stole 18 years of my life. He stole my trust, my security, my belief in the institution of marriage. He would have stolen my very existence if circumstances hadn't intervened. I don't ask for vengeance, I ask for justice. I ask that this court send a message that men like Marcus Morrison cannot betray and exploit and plot murder against their wives and expect to walk away unscathed. I ask that he face consequences proportional to the magnitude of his crimes. The judge took everything under advisement and announced the sentence 3 days later. 32 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. Marcus would be 84 years old before he saw freedom again, assuming he survived that long. The sentence was among the harshest ever imposed for crimes of this nature, a reflection of both the severity of Marcus's actions and the strength of the case Victor had helped build. I was there when they led him away after sentencing, watching as federal marshals escorted my ex-husband from the courtroom for the last time. He looked back at me once, his eyes pleading for something, forgiveness, perhaps, or mercy, or simply acknowledgement that I had once loved him, but I gave him nothing. I stared back at him with the same cold composure I had maintained throughout the trial, the armor I had built around my broken heart, and I let him see that the woman he had tried to destroy was stronger than he had ever imagined. The door closed behind him. He was gone. In the months that followed, I set about rebuilding everything Marcus had tried to take from me. The courts awarded me full ownership of Morrison Development as restitution for the embezzled funds, plus damages for the years of financial manipulation and the attempt on my life. The company that had been half mine by rights was now entirely mine by law, and I threw myself into running it with a passion I had forgotten I possessed. My first order of business was a complete audit of every transaction Morrison Development had conducted in the past decade. What we found was even worse than Victor had predicted. Not just the 4 million Marcus had stolen for himself, but millions more in fraudulent deals, kickbacks, and corrupt arrangements with contractors and city officials. I reported everything to the authorities, cooperated fully with every investigation, and watched as the rot Marcus had cultivated was systematically exposed and excised. The company survived. More than survived, it thrived. Freed from Marcus's corruption, Morrison Development became what it should have been all along, a legitimate business built on integrity and fair dealing. I hired new management, implemented rigorous financial controls, and began rebuilding relationships with partners and clients who had grown wary of Marcus's questionable practices. Within 6 months, we had closed 3 major deals that Marcus had been unable to finalize, and the company's reputation was slowly being restored. Victor remained a constant presence in my life. Though the nature of our relationship had evolved from crisis partnership to genuine friendship. He had retired from the federal bench shortly after the trial, citing health concerns and a desire to spend more time with his family. But I suspected the truth was more complicated, that the ordeal had reminded him of why he had gone into law in the first place, and that he wanted to devote his remaining years to work that mattered rather than the tedious routine of appellate cases. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation," he told me one evening over dinner at my house. "Something focused on helping victims of financial crimes navigate the legal system. There are so many people like you out there, Elena. People who have been betrayed by spouses or business partners or trusted advisors, who don't have the resources or the connections to fight back effectively. I'd like to use what I've learned to help them." "That sounds wonderful," I said. "Let me know if I can help." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. I could use a board member who understands what these victims go through, someone who can speak to the experience of rebuilding after betrayal. Would you be interested?" I didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." The Ashford Foundation for Financial Justice launched 3 months later, funded by a combination of Victor's personal wealth and contributions from supporters who believed in the mission. I served on the board alongside attorneys and former prosecutors and victim advocates, helping to shape programs that provided legal assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support to victims of fraud and financial manipulation. It was the most meaningful work I had ever done, transforming my own trauma into something that could help others survive similar ordeals. Camilla graduated from Stanford that spring, finishing at the top of her class despite the turmoil that had consumed our family during her senior year. I sat in the audience with tears streaming down my face as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. My brilliant daughter, who had stood by me through everything, who had confronted her father with courage I hadn't known she possessed, who had emerged from the wreckage of her childhood stronger and more determined than ever. "I'm so proud of you," I told her, afterward, holding her tight while cameras flashed around us. "More proud than words can express." "I learned it from you, Mom." She pulled back to look at me, her eyes shining. "Everything I am, everything I'm going to become, it's because of you. Because you showed me what it means to survive, what it means to fight back, what it means to refuse to be destroyed by people who want to hurt you." She had accepted a position at a prestigious law firm in San Francisco, specializing in white-collar crime and financial fraud. She told me she wanted to spend her career putting people like her father behind bars, protecting victims like her mother from predators who hid behind expensive suits and charming smiles. I couldn't have been more proud. 1 year after the arrest, I stood in the garden where I had told Camilla the truth about her father, looking out over the roses that had witnessed so much change. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if Marcus's departure had lifted a darkness I hadn't even recognized was there. I had considered selling it, starting fresh somewhere without all the memories, but in the end, I decided to stay. This was my home. I had built it, decorated it, raised my daughter here. Marcus had forfeited his claim to any of it the moment he plotted my death. The grandmother's pendant hung around my neck again, reclaimed from evidence after the trial concluded. I touched it often, feeling the cool weight of the diamond against my skin, remembering the woman who had worn it before me, and the legacy of strength she had passed down through the generations. She would have been proud of me, I thought. She would have understood that sometimes survival requires more than just staying alive. It requires fighting back, reclaiming what was stolen, refusing to be diminished by those who tried to destroy you. I received a letter from Marcus a few weeks after the anniversary of his arrest, written on prison stationery, postmarked from the federal penitentiary, where he would spend the next 3 decades. I didn't open it. I didn't need to know what excuses he had manufactured, what apologies he had crafted, what manipulations he was still attempting from behind bars. Instead, I tore the envelope in half, then quarters, then eighths, and fed the pieces into the shredder in my home office. Whatever Marcus Morrison had to say to me, I was no longer interested in hearing it. Brittany wrote to me as well from the women's federal prison where she was serving her 20-year sentence. Her letter was longer, more plaintive, filled with expressions of remorse and pleas for forgiveness that rang hollow even on paper. She claimed she had been manipulated by Marcus, that she hadn't truly understood what she was participating in, that she was a victim too in her own way. I shredded that letter as well. Brittany Walker had stood in my hospital room and discussed my murder with enthusiasm in her voice. Whatever regret she felt now was too little, too late. The work of healing continued, day by day, week by week, month by month. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and betrayal, working through the layers of damage that 18 years of living with a predator had inflicted on my psyche. I learned to trust my own perceptions again, to believe in my own worth, to recognize that the failure of my marriage was not a reflection of my inadequacy, but of Marcus's fundamental corruption. I learned that survival was not enough, that I deserved to thrive, to flourish, to build a life that brought me genuine joy rather than the hollow performance of happiness I had accepted for so long. I started dating again, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. The men I met were nothing like Marcus, kind and straightforward and refreshingly honest about their intentions. I wasn't looking for another marriage, wasn't ready to trust anyone that completely again, but I discovered that companionship didn't require commitment, that intimacy didn't require vulnerability, that I could enjoy the company of others without sacrificing the independence I had fought so hard to reclaim. Victor and I remained close, our friendship deepening as the years passed. He was the godfather Camilla had never had, the mentor I had needed during my darkest hours, the reminder that there were still good men in the world even after Marcus had tried to convince me otherwise. We had dinner together once a week, discussing the Foundation's work, sharing updates on our respective lives, enjoying the simple pleasure of conversation with someone who understood everything we had been through. On the 2nd anniversary of Marcus's arrest, I threw a party, not a celebration of his downfall exactly. That would have been petty, beneath the woman I was trying to become. Instead, I called it a celebration of survival, a gathering of everyone who had helped me through the darkest period of my life. Victor was there, of course, along with his wife Margaret, who had become a dear friend. Camilla flew in from San Francisco, bringing her new boyfriend, a gentle young man who clearly adored her, the attorneys and investigators who had built the case, the friends who had stood by me when the scandal broke, the staff of Morrison Development who had remained loyal through the turmoil. We gathered in the garden as the sun set, raising glasses of champagne to toast everything we had overcome. I looked around at the faces of the people I loved, the community I had built from the wreckage of my marriage, and I felt something I had almost forgotten was possible. I felt happy, genuinely, unconditionally happy. "Thank you all for being here," I said, my voice carrying across the garden. 2 years ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, sedated and helpless, listening to my husband plan my murder. I thought my life was over. I thought everything I had worked for, everything I had built, everything I had dreamed of was about to be stolen from me by a man I had trusted completely. I paused, feeling the weight of the pendant against my chest. But I was wrong, because I wasn't alone. Because Victor Ashford happened to be in the bed next to mine, and he refused to let injustice stand. Because my daughter showed more courage than I ever knew she had. Because the justice system, for once, actually worked the way it's supposed to. I raised my glass higher, watching the champagne catch the last light of the setting sun. To survival, I said. To justice. To everyone who helped me reclaim my life. And to the future, whatever it holds. The toast echoed back from a dozen voices, champagne glasses glinting in the twilight. I drank deeply, savoring the moment, letting the warmth of community and accomplishment wash over me. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Camilla had retreated to her old bedroom and the house had fallen quiet, I sat alone in the living room where I had once waited for the FBI to arrive. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the foyer, marking time just as it had on that terrible morning 2 years ago. But everything else was different. I was different. I thought about the woman I had been before all of this, the trusting wife, the devoted mother, the partner who had accepted lies as truth and manipulation as love. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I had known briefly in another life. The woman I had become was stronger, sharper, more aware of the dangers that lurked behind charming smiles and empty promises. She had lost her innocence, but she had gained something more valuable in return. She had gained herself. Marcus was rotting in a federal prison cell, and he would continue rotting there until he was an old man. Brittany was doing the same, her dreams of luxury and stolen jewelry shattered beyond repair. The money they had stolen had been recovered. The company they had corrupted had been cleansed. The life they had tried to take from me was mine again, more completely and more preciously than ever before. I touched the pendant around my neck one final time, feeling the cool diamond against my fingertips, and I smiled. The queen had not just reclaimed her throne. She had rebuilt her entire kingdom, stronger and more beautiful than before, and she would never, ever let anyone take it from her again. This is where my story ends, or perhaps where it truly begins. The woman who emerged from that hospital room 2 years ago is not the woman who entered it. She is fiercer, wiser, more formidable in every way. She has learned that trust must be earned, not given freely. She has learned that strength comes from surviving the unsurvivable, from facing the worst that human nature has to offer and refusing to be destroyed by it. She has learned that sometimes the greatest victory is simply standing tall when everyone expected you to fall. If you're watching this and you're going through something similar, if someone you trusted has betrayed you, if someone you loved has tried to destroy you, if you feel like the ground has been pulled from beneath your feet and you don't know how you'll ever stand again, I want you to know that survival is possible. Justice is possible. A future brighter than anything you can imagine right now is possible. You just have to hold on. You just have to fight. You just have to refuse to let the people who hurt you define the rest of your life. They wanted to break me. They failed, and they always will.